NC pork. Good for the plate, great for the state.
Welcome to This Week in College Football with David Glenn, brought to you by the North Carolina Pork Council. Thank you so much for joining us again this week. I'm Chris Edwards, happy to be back with DG here in year 3 of our quickly growing North Carolina Sports Network. A huge thank you to our viewers, listeners, readers, and subscribers. Because of you, we've more than tripled in size from our first year to our second year, and we hope to keep that trend going here as this show is part of what we like to call Bold North State Football Daily, which, as the name might suggest, provides everyday coverage of the NFL's Carolina Panthers and the 32 college football teams in our state, with a little bit of high school football sprinkled in as well. On our show here in 2025, DG and I will mostly look ahead at the upcoming week's college football matchups. We'll also discuss some of the sport's biggest headlines and take a quick glance back with some of DG's expert analysis on the biggest games and developments from the previous week's schedule. DG now in his 39th year covering college football, both here in North Carolina and around the Atlantic Coast Conference. DG, great to see you after a very busy week 1 around the college football season.
It's great to see you, Chris. You know, as that attorney in me, I love evidence. And now, after some pontification during the offseason and in the preseason, we actually have games to digest. We will glance back, but we have maybe not quite as exciting a lineup as week 1 offered in major college football, but close to home and even nationally, there's some fun games to dive into, so let's do it.
Well, there were some big winners in week 1 of the college football season that included Miami, Florida State, Georgia Tech, NC State, Appalachian State, and Gardner-Webb. But on the flip side, there were some big losers too, including Bill Belichick and his UNC debut on Monday night. More about that a little bit later on in our show. But let's get right to this week's biggest contest, beginning with those involving North Carolina-based teams and continuing with our national matchups, including one that will be played right here in North Carolina on Saturday afternoon. This segment is brought to you by our great friends at Atlantic Tire and Service, where DG and his family take all of their vehicles for routine maintenance, service needs, and a world-class selection of new tires. Atlantic Tire and Service, your one-stop tire and auto repair provider, with highly trained technicians and a sales and support staff that are really second to none. They've grown to 7 locations, 2 in Raleigh, 2 in Cary, 1 in Durham, 1 in Wake Forest, and 1 in Greensboro. Learn more at AtlanticTireOnline.com. DG, will start at Carter Finley Stadium Saturday at noon. This game will be televised on ESPN2. It's a pair of 1-0 teams as Virginia comes down to take on NC State, the Wolfpack, a 2-point home favorite at Carter Finley.
Yeah, this one could be a lot of fun, and it's extra fun to see them both undefeated coming into this game. And I like the fact that this ACC matchup is getting some quality TV exposure on ESPN2. This is probably Coach Tony Elliott's best team in his 4 years at Virginia. That does not mean it is a juggernaut. Remember, Elliott's first 3 teams in Charlottesville all failed to make a bowl game. But it is definitely a more talented squad overall, and it's probably tougher in the trenches than what we've seen from his UVA squads in the past. The Cavaliers went out in the offseason and got a quality quarterback, a North Texas transfer named Chandler Morris, who finally got his chance with that program after being a backup at some bigger schools. He was sensational in the Cavaliers' 48-7 victory over Coastal Carolina last week, now coached by former NC State offensive coordinator Tim Beck. Morris did eventually leave that game late with an injury. That was a little scary for UVA fans who finally thought they had found their quarterback. But Morris has been back at practice with no limitations. So Tony Elliott says he will be back in the starting lineup against the Wolfpack this weekend. This guy can hurt you with his arm or his legs, so that is going to be a different challenge than what the Wolfpack faced last week when, remember, it was ECU's QB, Caton Hauser. He's more of a pocket passer type, and he actually threw the ball pretty well against the Pack. UVA can do either with Chandler Morris. They also secured in the offseason a quality running back in transfer Jamari Taylor, formerly of NC Central University, right here in our backyard. He did great things for the Eagles. Although the UVA offensive line did not create a lot of holes for Taylor or anybody else last week, even against Coastal Carolina. So that's kind of a continuing concern and theme for Tony Elliott in year 4 in Charlottesville. But at wide receiver for the Wahoos, again, they're more dangerous. James Madison transfer Cam Ross and former Kent State transfer Trell Harris, who was there last year at UVA but missed most of the season with an injury. They both looked really good last week catching balls from Chandler Morris. NC State, of course, has plenty of weapons too. Part of why I think this is going to be a fun game to watch. That combination of CJ Bailey back as the starter at quarterback, Hollywood Smothers, I thought looked sensational, high energy, and just with an impressive ability to pivot quickly against the Pirates at running back. Justin Jolie, we know, is an elite ACC tight end. And then Wesley Grimes, Noah Rogers, their exciting freshman, Teddy Hoffman, I thought gave ECU fits last week, although the Wolfpack did end up with only 24 points on the scoreboard. Before the win over the Pirates, remember, we mentioned that it was up to the Wolfpack's defensive front to set a nasty tone if the Pack was going to beat ECU, which we predicted, and I think that was fundamental to the Wolfpack's victory. ECU threw it, but ECU couldn't run it a lick, and it was because of that front 6, front 7, depending on the formation. The Pack gave up passing yards again with that rebuilt secondary that we described, so it is a little bit alarming that Chandler Morris comes to town with the ability to throw or run, but I think the Pack front, again, Caden Fordham and Sean Brown at linebacker, Sebastian Harsh and Kyan Sloan at defensive end, Brandon Cleveland in the middle there. Those guys have the ability to disrupt UVA's offense and throw the Cavaliers off their game in a way that Coastal just never managed in that slaughter last week. So that's, again, the key. It feels like a repetition, but I think CJ Bailey and those guys will do their things on offense. If the Pack's going to win, it's going to take another strong effort from that front 6 or 7 to slow the Cavaliers down.
What about North Carolina? Bill Belichick and the Tar Heels trying to bounce back in week 2. They're on the road this week at Charlotte, a team that's also 0-1 after that loss to Appalachian State at Bank of America Stadium. This is a Saturday night game at 7 p.m. on ESPN+. The Tar Heels, a 14-point road favorite at the 49ers' recently expanded Jerry Richardson Stadium.
Yeah, it feels weird to say that this is being called the biggest game in Charlotte 49ers football history. And by the way, it's hard to argue with that description for reasons we'll get to. But you just mentioned it's only on ESPN Plus, right? We have to kind of recalibrate how we view these things because we've moved away from the pay TV, cable, satellite, traditional model. And more people, there are tens and tens of millions with ESPN Plus or this new, all ESPN all the time direct to consumer option that they have. But maybe one part of why it is the biggest game in Charlotte 49ers football history, part of that has to do with the 49ers, but part of that has to do with a more vulnerable than expected version of big North Carolina coming to town. And the Tar Heels doing so on what is a short week after that ugly 48-14 loss to TCU on Monday night. You don't have as many days to prepare as you usually do. Charlotte is, for those who don't know, our state's most recent addition to major college football. The 49ers hardly ever get the so-called big boy programs to play them at their place in the Queen City. And the university just recently broke ground on what they call their Jerry Richardson Stadium expansion. That groundbreaking was just last week. Jerry Richardson, of course, the guy who brought the Carolina Panthers to the NFL many years ago. With that massive construction project underway, it will not be completed until 2027, but it does have a chance to dramatically change over time the perception of a Charlotte 49ers program that has only one winning season in its entire history so far. In terms of the quality of play, I'll just be really blunt here. Both UNC and Charlotte looked really bad last week. There's just no way to put lipstick on that pig. Shout out to the North Carolina Pork Council. The Tar Heels got annihilated by a pretty impressive TCU team. And if the Horned Frogs head coach, Sonny Dykes, Chris, had wanted to score 60 points or more than 60 points on Bill Belichick's team instead of the 48 that the Horned Frogs ended up with, there is no doubt in my mind, as someone who was there at Kenan Stadium watching every play from beginning to end with my own eyes, there is no doubt that Sonny Dykes could have put up that 60 burger with that senior quarterback, Josh Hoover, against that Carolina defense, which didn't have really any playmakers in the trenches and had lots of coverage and tackling problems in the secondary. Carolina was also horrific on offense, especially when the South Alabama transfer Gio Lopez was in the game as the starter. Lopez threw a pick six, giving TCU 7 points, coughed up a fumble that resulted in a scoop and score, giving the Horned Frogs 7 more points, had trouble with his decision-making, had trouble with his throwing accuracy, and just never looked comfortable. As a guy, we reminded folks all offseason, some got tired of hearing it, but we repeated it because we thought it was important. A guy who did not arrive until after spring practice and officially never wore a UNC uniform until the month of August. That's a really, really, really short window in which to ask someone to play well or run an offense efficiently. And it just didn't happen for Gio Lopez and the Tar Heels. Max Johnson, the sixth-year senior, coming off his injury, was better. We'll see what Belichick and his staff decide about those two guys going forward, including on Saturday night against the 49ers. Meanwhile, Charlotte flat out laid an egg against App State last weekend. I mean, it was the coaching debut of Dowell Loggins with the Mountaineers and the coaching debut of Tim Albin with the 49ers, and only one went away from Bank of America Stadium happy. And it was Loggins and the Mountaineers. Their offense looked brilliant, even though their staff is new. A.J. Swan was a brand new quarterback. Lots of transfers in the mix. The Mountaineers somehow hit the ground running and looked like a Sun Belt contender. And the 49ers stumbled and bumbled and looked like a team headed for another finish near the bottom of the American Conference. The 49ers starting quarterback surprised me. It was Connor Harrell, a UNC transfer who was highly erratic when he had to play for the Tar Heels. He just wasn't any better for the 49ers. Former Duke quarterback Grayson Loftus is one of the backups there. We'll see how Coach Albin decides with his staff to go forward at the most important position on the field. Meanwhile, Charlotte's defense got absolutely torn up by App State's passing game. So, you've heard about, what is it, the irresistible force against the immovable object. This is the opposite of that. Neither the Heels nor the 49ers have anything significant going for them right now, to be blunt. And obviously, both want to change that tune starting Saturday night. Carolina is the more talented team, but I'm going to be fascinated to see how they psychologically bounce back with, again, one less day to prepare than usual, and while going on the road, when 9 times out of 10, if Charlotte and UNC play, you'd expect it to be at Kenan Stadium. There's a huge pregame concert. The student body is expected to be out in force for this Charlotte game. Again, they're calling it their biggest game in history. And a week ago, they might not have been sure they had a shot against the Tar Heels. Now, I think everybody on both sidelines is guessing what they're going to get in this matchup.
Game 3 on the docket that we're going to talk about here in the opening segment. DG, Western Carolina 0-1. The Catamounts are headed to Winston-Salem to take on 1-0 Wake Forest. 2 o'clock on Saturday. This is also a stream-only game. ACC Network Extra, ESPN+. The Demon Deacons are a big favorite at home in Winston-Salem.
Yeah, this one's a little off the beaten path, obviously, but we're including it because Western Carolina is still a top 25 team in the FCS rankings, even after losing a close game to Gardner-Webb last weekend. And because the Catamounts have that fun, explosive, dangerous offense, they put up 45 points in their loss last week under their head coach, Kerwin Bell. More on that later in today's show. We're also including it because Wake Forest just wasn't very good in Coach Jake Dickert's debut last week against Kennesaw State. I thought the Demon Deacons defense did a pretty good job of harassing Kennesaw State's quarterback last week, but they were not great against the run, which is alarming. And on offense, Wake just didn't look very confident in the passing game. Although the new quarterback, Robbie Ashford's an outstanding athlete, and he did throw for more than 200 yards last week, he's never been a polished passer. And even against Kennesaw State, he just wasn't ready to put up bigger numbers. It did hurt literally and figuratively when Wake Forest star running back Damon Claiborne, their best player, left the game early last week with a painful rib injury. But the Demon Deacons should have been able to run the ball more effectively against Kennesaw State, even without Claiborne. So it's kind of borderline embarrassing to score only 10 points against an opponent, Kennesaw State, that only recently made the jump from the FCS ranks to the FBS. Wake ultimately did get the win, unlike the Tar Heels. It was 10-9 over Kennesaw, but the Deacs are going to be expected to find ways to dominate Western Carolina, an actual FCS opponent this week. That is not an easy task against Coach Bell's Catamounts, but if Dickert is going to have an impressive debut season in Winston-Salem, his team is going to have or show a lot of improvement from week 1 to week 2.
As we wrap up this opening segment, DG, are there other games that might involve at least one team from our state that you think are worth more of a brief mention this week, and why would that be?
Yeah, at the FBS level, I think it'll be interesting to see if East Carolina, coming off that close loss at NC State, can dominate its opponent this week from the FCS ranks, Campbell, in what is the Pirates' home opener there in front of the fans at Dowdy-Ficklin Stadium in Greenville. Campbell actually played fairly well last week in a road loss to a top 10 FCS opponent, Rhode Island. And the Pirates clearly need to improve both their running offense and their passing defense. So those are among the things I'll be watching there. In the ACC, fans can get a Friday night national television look at a talented Louisville team, which I think is a contender and which is 1-0 going into its matchup against 1-0 James Madison, which for App State fans is expected to be one of the best teams in the Sun Belt Conference yet again this season. And then on Saturday night, still in the ACC, 1-0 Boston College under Bill O'Brien travels to 1-0 Michigan State in a game that will be televised on NBC proper and streamed on Peacock. And then finally at the Division II level, Johnson C. Smith, one of the best football stories in our entire state that you and I were able to explore for much of last season, will host the number 11 team in the Division II national rankings, Valdosta State. That's been a superpower at that level for a long time. Right there at J.C. Smith's Irwin Belk Complex in Charlotte on Saturday at noon. That would be a huge win for head coach Maurice Flowers and the resurgent Golden Bulls program if they could get it done on Saturday.
We're talking football tailgating right here on the North Carolina Sports Network with Roy Lee Lindsay, the CEO of the North Carolina Port Council. And when you go out to the stadium, man, you can't forget the essentials, but what are the key things that make a tailgate?
I think there are several things that you need to do when you prepare for a tailgate. So I'm going to share here. One, however much ice you think you need more. You never have enough ice, especially for those early games when it's North Carolina, maybe a little toasty. So throw in an extra cooler of ice. If you don't need it, somebody nearby does, and you can always trade ice for other things at the tailgate. So keep that in mind.
All right.
Also, you're going to want to make sure you keep your tailgate clean, right? If you're using cutting boards, if you're using knives, utensils, so carry around some disinfecting wipes so that you can wipe things down, wipe it off, turn that cutting board over, so you do some food safety things. Keep everything healthy. You don't want anybody to get sick from your tailgate. So think about the little things like that as you go. I like this as well. So here's some hand sanitizer. Don't forget your hand sanitizer. And then finally, this sounds silly, but don't forget your sunscreen, right? Because if you sit out in the sun at 2 o'clock in the afternoon at the stadium and you didn't remember your hat and your face sunburns, when you wake up Sunday, you're absolutely miserable. So remember the sunscreen. Consider this a tip from your mom. Put on the sunscreen. Even if you think you're going to be under your tent all day at the tailgate, Odds are, as the crowd builds, people get pushed out away from the tent, you're standing out around it, you're out in the sun. Don't forget the sunscreen. Mom will thank you, and you'll thank me as well.
Tailgating 101 tips from the North Carolina Port Council and the North Carolina Sports Network.
Looking for real deal local flavor in Wilmington? Head to the Original Saltworks restaurant, run by Bob Hubbard and serving up Southern staples since the 1970s. Hot grits, buttery biscuits, juicy burgers and dogs. It's fast, it's fresh, and it's full of bold North State pride. Open for breakfast and lunch 7 days a week, always starting at 7 a.m. It's the Original Saltworks on Oleander Drive in Wilmington.
Diving right into our ACC and National Week 2 look ahead, brought to you by our good friends at XL Moving and Storage, a family-owned Allied Van Lines partner here in North Carolina with more than 25 years of award-winning experience that can help you with your move to North Carolina, within North Carolina, away from North Carolina, even internationally, while also assisting with all your storage needs. Learn more at excelms.com. That's XL Moving and Storage. Unlike last week, only one ranked-on-ranked matchup in the entire Week 2 schedule, DG. We'll get to that one in a little bit, but we'll start with a Big Ten team that's now on the precipice of crashing the top 10 in the national polls. They are visiting ACC country this week. We'll be there to see this one with our own eyes for our Old North State tailgate and traveling sports circus. And it's Saturday at noon from Wallace Wade Stadium in Durham, where the Duke Blue Devils host the number 11 Illinois Fighting Illini. The Illini, a 2-point road favorite at Wallace Wade.
Yeah, if it sounds odd to anyone to hear that a Duke-Illinois football game is somehow of national significance, there is no need to apologize. These two schools have played only twice ever on the gridiron, and both of those matchups, Chris, came in the 1950s and 1960s before even I was born. That's a long time ago. This time, the Illini are knocking on the door of that national top 10 ranking under their fifth-year head coach, Brett Bielema. He is an Illinois native who did great things, folks will remember, as the head coach at Wisconsin more than a decade ago. And just last year, he led the Illini to a 10-3 campaign that was the best season at that school in football since 2001. Meanwhile, Duke seems positioned, in my eyes, to be nationally relevant again, coming off the 9-4 record in head coach Manny Diaz's debut a year ago. Those 9 victories, of course, tied for the second most wins in Blue Devils football history. And I think Duke has a chance to be the best team in North Carolina again this year. And who knows how far they can climb up the ACC ladder. There are 3 main reasons we're taking our Old North State tailgate and traveling sports circus to Durham on Saturday morning, leading up to that noon kickoff on ESPN proper. First, we do try to hit at least one home game at each Big Four school every year. Doesn't always happen, but most of the time. And this may be the only nationally ranked opponent that Duke hosts in 2025, although some other good teams will be in town later. Second, other than maybe Michigan's trip to Oklahoma on Saturday night, which we'll get to later, there may not be a better matchup in all of college football this weekend. I'm serious about that. And third, this game will include 2 highly accomplished, high-profile quarterbacks. Senior Luke Altmaier, an Ole Miss transfer who is now in his 3rd season as the Illini starter, was voted by the Big Ten media back in the preseason as one of the top 2 QBs in the Big Ten, alongside Drew Aller of Penn State. At Duke, of course, the new starter is Tulane transfer Darian Mensah, who had a really strong debut in Durham last week after getting that multi-million-dollar deal from the Blue Devils in the offseason as one of the highest-ranked quarterbacks in this year's transfer portal. This game should be a lot of fun to watch. Illinois, which has a huge percentage of its top players back from last season, is viewed by some, as the ranking might suggest, as a legitimate contender for the college football playoff. I'm just hoping for great weather and a big crowd at Wallace Wade Stadium, because I believe that this Duke team under Manny Diaz does have a legitimate shot at what would be a high-profile upset in this one, maybe even one that could propel Duke into the national top 25 as the Blue Devils can knock the Illini down the ladder a few pegs.
What about a Texas-sized showdown on Saturday afternoon? Baylor 0-1 visiting 17th ranked SMU. This is noon on Saturday, televised on the CW. The Mustangs a 3-point home favorite at Ford Stadium in Dallas.
Yeah, we're including this one in part because there aren't many Power 4 versus Power 4 contests on the entire Week 2 schedule. And in part because out of all the ACC football contenders this year, Clemson, Miami, Florida State, Louisville, Georgia Tech, Pitt, whoever else you want to throw in there, we may have talked the least in the month plus buildup to this season about SMU, which I think is a legitimate contender. Remember, the Mustangs finished 11-3 last year, made the ACC championship game, and competed in the college football playoff. And that was in their first year as a member of the Atlantic Coast Conference. We had seen already Coach Rhett Lashley and the Mustangs up close in 2023 when we took our tailgate tour to Greenville, and the Mustangs beat East Carolina pretty convincingly on their way to what then in 2023 was another 11-3 season, and in that case ended with an American Conference championship in what was the Mustangs' final season in that league, as it turned out. Now, after those back-to-back 11-win campaigns I just mentioned, both of which ended with a top 25 national ranking, SMU has a shot at a third consecutive special season. How have they done it? With a combination of homegrown talent from the legendary Lone Star State and with a bunch of money. I mean, a whole bunch of money from wealthy alumni and supporters, which enabled them to both join the ACC, remember, and in the transfer portal, that money has also enabled them to supplement their depth chart with big-time talent from other major programs. Remember that SMU's invitation from the ACC came with the requirement that they would forego $270 million in media rights revenue. They will not get a regular full-size check from the ACC headquarters until the year 2033 at SMU. Now, how can you possibly afford to do all that? Well, in the summer of 2023, listen to this, within 5 days of SMU officially announcing it was accepting the ACC's offer, 31 wealthy SMU supporters stepped forward in a 5-day period and donated collectively more than $100 million to the cause. And some of those same people, by the way, own or run companies that have been able to contribute in the transfer portal. On top of that, 3 of SMU's most accomplished players this year, and this fascinates me, redshirt junior quarterback Kevin Jennings, senior tight end RJ Maryland, and senior safety Isaiah Wacobia, all grew up in the Dallas area and went straight to the Mustangs out of high school, not transfers. But the entire starting offensive line, and this is where the matching of the homegrown high school talent in that great high school Friday Night Lights state with the transfer portal, this is where it comes into focus. I just mentioned those 3 prominent homegrown Dallas prep stars. The starting offensive line at SMU right now previously started at places like Arkansas, Miami, and Oklahoma. I don't mean they played there. I mean they started at least part-time at those other schools. Others were backups at places like Texas and Texas A&M, proud SEC programs, obviously. Those guys just wanted more playing time without having to leave the state that they grew up in. So they just transferred down the road to Dallas and are now functional, starting in many cases players for SMU. The Lone Star State, by the way, is so big it has 13 FBS level programs alone. Remember, here in North Carolina, we have 7. The magical combination of head coach Rhett Lashley, that huge, hard to comprehend SMU money, and those productive talent pipelines I just described has basically enabled a program that infamously received the death penalty for monumental and countless NCAA rules violations in the 1980s to be nationally relevant for now 3 years in a row And that is after a 30-year plus period without a single top 25 finish in the national polls for the Mustangs. That is about as wild a pendulum swing as we have had in all of college football over that time period.
Finally, in this segment, DG, it's the big matchup on Saturday night. Number 15, Michigan at number 18, Oklahoma. Both these teams 1-0. 7:30 kickoff from Norman. It's on ABC. The Sooners favored by 5 points at home.
Yeah, this is probably the biggest TV game of the college football weekend, when a lot of football fans are going to be, entranced with the opening week of NFL action. But the Wolverines and the Sooners are both, of course, huge football brand names. They're both ranked in the national top 25, as you said, Chris, entering this matchup. It was just 2 years ago when Coach Jim Harbaugh, now back in the NFL, head coach of the LA Chargers, led his alma mater, Michigan, in controversial fashion, filled with a spying controversy and various NCAA rules violations, to its first national championship since 1997, and only the Wolverines' second national championship in football since 1948. Harbaugh headed to the NFL in large part because he was suspended by the NCAA for a full year, and he was given what they call a 4-year show cause penalty all the way into 2028. Anyway, Harbaugh's successor, Sharon Moore, has the inevitable pressure that goes with finishing only 8-5 in his first year last year. In the same year, remember, that arch rival Ohio State, despite losing to the Wolverines in Columbus a year ago, those Buckeyes did go on to win the national championship, which always hurts in a rivalry. On the other sideline, Oklahoma coach Brent Venables, the longtime and legendary former Clemson defensive coordinator, he's now in his 4th year as the head coach of the Sooners, and he's under a lot of pressure because 2 of his first 3 years ended with losing records, and that's obviously not going to cut it at OU. Personnel-wise, it could be a fun matchup on Saturday night on ABC between really talented quarterbacks. The Oklahoma starter is named John Mateer. He's a Washington State transfer, and he's an NFL prospect that a lot of Wake Forest fans wished had followed Jake Dickert to Winston-Salem the way so many other Washington State players did. Instead, he's starting for the Sooners. Michigan's starter is a true freshman, Chris, named Bryce Underwood, who just recently turned 18 years old. He was rated by some the #1 high school senior in America last year at any position. He had been committed to Brian Kelly at LSU, and he switched his commitment pretty late in the process from LSU to Michigan. He is from Michigan. Then he enrolled early with the Wolverines so he could go through spring practice to get ready for the 2025 season. Underwood is only the 4th freshman ever to start at quarterback for the Michigan Wolverines. Can you imagine being 17 years old just a month ago, and your first road start as a college football player is in Norman, Oklahoma, against the top 25 Sooners team, man? That is not your typical opening game for any college freshman, and that makes Saturday night that much more interesting to watch. Looking for real deal local flavor in Wilmington? Head to the Original Saltworks restaurant, run by Bob Hubbard and serving up Southern staples since the 1970s. Hot grits, buttery biscuits, juicy burgers and dogs. It's fast, it's fresh, and it's full of bold North State pride. Open for breakfast and lunch 7 days a week, always starting at 7 a.m. It's the Original Saltworks on Oleander Drive in Wilmington.
DG, diving right into our coaches and quarterback segment, brought to you by our good friends at Lawson Insurance, who last year celebrated their 50th anniversary of helping DG and many other North Carolina citizens and businesses with their personal and commercial insurance needs. You can reach out to the brothers Ken Miller and Michael Lawson. Like all of us, they're huge sports fans. Give them a call at 919-846-2090 or search Lawson Insurance online. We'll start with the head coaches across the ACC and in North Carolina. DG, who jumped out as the best and the worst of the coaches in week 1?
Chris, I think the best of list includes a bunch of guys. Mario Cristobal of Miami, Mike Norvell of Florida State, Dow Loggins of App State, even a guy named Chris Reisert of Gardner-Webb at the FCS level. I'm going to dive into the details of their week one stories a little bit later in today's show during our fun facts and shoutouts segment. But I wanted to at least mention them here up front as I transition to the worst of. The worst of list from Labor Day weekend has to start with Bill Belichick after his absolutely embarrassing, disastrous debut at UNC. Belichick was not alone in this category. Charlotte did look horrible in Tim Albin's debut, which was also on national television. And as we mentioned, Wake Forest looked extremely shaky in that narrow win over Kennesaw State in Jake Dickert's debut. But Chapel Bill, as some call him, a guy who's being paid $10 million a year, deserves the most scrutiny and the most criticism here as I see it. And let me make this clear. It was not, N-O-T, not embarrassing to simply lose to TCU. It's a good football team. Heck, we've been telling everyone for a month now, if not longer, that the Tar Heels were an obvious underdog against the Horned Frogs for a lot of very valid reasons, and that anyone predicting a 10-win campaign or something similar for Carolina was simply ignoring or pretending to ignore a lot of really important facts and evidence, beginning with the need for special talent to have a special season. Whereas UNC has average talent at best by ACC standards, I've mentioned it before, but NFL scouts say there's only one prospect for the 2026 NFL draft on the entire UNC roster. TCU is a Big 12 team with a proven veteran quarterback in Josh Hoover, a proven veteran defensive back in Bud Clark, who had the pick six, and a proven experienced head coach in Sonny Dykes, who's averaged 9 wins a year during his time with the Horned Frogs. That part, not embarrassing. What was embarrassing for Belichick and his staff was that, number one, UNC's offense looked completely unprepared and overwhelmed under a starting quarterback, South Alabama transfer Gio Lopez, who did not arrive in Chapel Hill until after spring practice, as we've been trying to tell folks for 6 months or more. That matters a lot. And number two, UNC's defensive players failed to disrupt TCU much at all. They missed multiple assignments that led to huge gains by the Horned Frogs. And they just overall made things too easy for their opponent. In Belichick's, this is a crazy stat, but in Belichick's entire NFL career, not one of his defenses gave up 48 points. And against TCU, not only did they give up 48, as I mentioned, if Sonny Dykes wanted to put up 60 or more, he absolutely positively could have. Watch the plays that were called midway through the third quarter and onward after it was 41-7 TCU. That was merciful of Sonny Dykes. He took his foot off the pedal midway through that third quarter. UNC's Gio Lopez had personally given up 14 points. The Carolina total for the game, their own quarterback gave up in the form of that pick six and that scoop and score. And on TCU's 75-yard touchdown run, Chris, a simple running play off right tackle. Not a single Carolina defender even touched the ball carrier for the entirety of 75 yards. That is not something you see very often. Do opponents make great plays? Of course they do. But if all 11 players are doing their jobs, there's no way somebody runs 75 yards literally without being touched. That means mental mistakes went along with that mediocre talent. Bottom line, the loss itself to that TCU team, not inherently embarrassing. Smart people picked the Horned Frogs to win that game. Some said convincingly. But the details of the loss, the margin of defeat, the way that it happened, the enormous disparity between the teams, that was embarrassing. And it's up to Belichick and his very expensive staff to keep that team together emotionally and psychologically, to pick up the pieces, X's and O's, Y's, and to find the schemes and find the players who give the Tar Heels the best chance to improve their play, to salvage their season, starting with much more beatable opponents Charlotte this week, the Richmond Spiders next week. If you don't get a lot better over these next 2 weeks, you're going to see a lot of people jumping off the Carolina bandwagon. And I mean, in the aftermath of more than 50% of those in attendance at Kenan Stadium were headed for the exits in the third quarter against TCU. It couldn't have started much worse for the Tar Heels. I don't think they're as bad as they looked against TCU, but they have to go out and prove that, starting with the Charlotte game on Saturday.
Similar question on the quarterbacks, DG. Which ACC or North Carolina-based programs should feel the best about their starter right now, and maybe which program should already have major concerns about that most important position on the field?
Yeah, in the ACC, it's too early to draw total and complete conclusions, but Georgia Tech loves its sixth-year senior in Haynes King, who played very well in the Yellow Jackets' victory at Colorado. Florida State was energized by the Boston College transfer Tommy Castellanos in the Seminoles' win over top 10 Alabama. Carson Beck, the Georgia transfer, had a nice debut for Miami coming off his injury with the Bulldogs in that Hurricanes victory over top 10 Notre Dame. Pitt really likes its returning starter, a redshirt sophomore named Eli Holstein, who's a former Alabama guy. SMU feels the same way about the redshirt junior Kevin Jennings that we mentioned earlier, who led the Mustangs to that ACC title game just a year ago. Besides Castellanos at FSU, I thought the other week one eye-openers were both Virginia's Chandler Morris that I mentioned. He's kind of almost a Baker Mayfield light dual threat guy with some swagger who really put up great numbers last year for North Texas in the American Conference. And he, again, might be the best QB that Tony Elliott, formerly of Clemson, has had in his 4 seasons with the Cavaliers. The other eye-opener, and man, I can't wait till you have to pronounce this, Cal has a true freshman named Jaron Sangupolo-Talai. He's a prep All-American from Hawaii. Remember how long it took us to get Tua Tagovailoa? This is similar. Jaron Sangupolo-Talai, a prep All-American from Hawaii who initially committed to the Cal Bears, then enrolled briefly at Oregon, then technically was a transfer when he changed his mind and decided to attend Cal after all. And guess what? He went through spring practice with the Bears. And Justin Wilcox, while on the hot seat, is an offensive guy with a nice tradition of handling quality quarterbacks. The Bears believe that Jaron is a big-time talent, and he did look great in Cal's season-opening win at Oregon State. At the other end of the spectrum, Stanford is probably the only school outside of our state that isn't sure that it has an above-average quarterback this season. Clemson does need Cade Klubnik to be better than he was in the loss to LSU. Virginia Tech needs Kyron Drones, another returning starter, to be better than he was in the loss to South Carolina. Syracuse needs its new starter, a Notre Dame transfer named Steve Angeli, is trying to be the successor of Kyle McCord, who was brilliant for the Orange last year. They need Angeli to be better for the Orange than he was in that loss to Tennessee. And then here in North Carolina, among our 7 FBS programs, Chris, it's like night and day, the answer. There's not much in between. Duke, NC State, ECU, and App State should be feeling pretty darn good right now about their quarterback depth chart, whereas UNC, Wake Forest, and Charlotte have some very significant QB questions as we speak. At Duke, it did take a while for the highly touted Tulane transfer Darian Mensa to get into groove against a well-coached Elon defense in week 1. But in the end, he was 27 for 34 passing for 389 yards, 3 touchdown passes, and no turnovers. That's tough to beat, right? Both NC State with C.J. Bailey and ECU with Caton Hauser, I thought they should feel mostly good about how those guys played in week 1 in that head-to-head matchup. Both went over 300 passing yards, minimized their mistakes. And at App State, A.J. Swan, former Vanderbilt starter who was stuck on the bench at LSU last year, he had a brilliant debut in the Mountaineers opener as their new starter. And we'll get to some more of those details a bit later. But finally, as we warned in the preseason, Charlotte, UNC, and Wake Forest just are not sure that they have an above average quarterback anywhere on the roster right now. Not somebody who's ready to be that. I don't mean someday. I mean ready now. And it's up to the guys on those depth charts, mainly Robbie Ashford at Wake, Gio Lopez or Max Johnson at Carolina or someone else, Connor Harrell, Grayson Loftus, or someone else at Charlotte. It's up to somebody to step forward with the help of their coaches to prove that assessment of those three programs' quarterback depth charts wrong.
All right, one more time out to burn. We'll come back and have more of This Week in College Football at David Glenn right here on the North Carolina Sports Network.
We're talking football tailgating right here on the North Carolina Sports Network with Roy Lee Lindsay, the CEO of the North Carolina Port Council. And when you go out to the stadium, man, you can't forget the essentials, but what are the key things that make a tailgate?
I think there are several things that you need to do when you prepare for a tailgate. So I'm going to share here. One, however much ice you think you need more. You never have enough ice, especially for those early games when it's North Carolina, maybe a little toasty. So throw in an extra cooler of ice. If you don't need it, somebody nearby does, and you can always trade ice for other things at the tailgate. So keep that in mind.
All right.
Also, you're going to want to make sure you keep your tailgate clean, right? If you're using cutting boards, if you're using knives, utensils, so carry around some disinfecting wipes so that you can wipe things down, wipe it off, turn that cutting board over, so you do some food safety things. Keep everything healthy. You don't want anybody to get sick from your tailgate. So think about the little things like that as you go. I like this as well. So here's some hand sanitizer. Don't forget your hand sanitizer. And then finally, this sounds silly, but don't forget your sunscreen, right? Because if you set out in the sun at 2 o'clock in the afternoon at the stadium and you didn't remember your hat and your face sunburns, when you wake up Sunday, you're absolutely miserable. So remember the sunscreen. Consider this a tip from your mom. Put on the sunscreen. Even if you think you're going to be under your tent all day at the tailgate, odds are as the crowd builds, people get pushed out away from the tent, you're standing out around it, you're out in the sun. Don't forget the sunscreen. Mom will thank you, and you'll thank me as well.
Tailgating 101 tips from the North Carolina Port Council and the North Carolina Sports Network.
Welcome back to This Week in College Football with David Glenn, presented by our friends at the North Carolina Port Council. Now, as you probably know by now, the focus of This Week in College Football is going to be forward-looking as often as possible, but we will always take a glance back at the previous weekend in college football too, and sometimes we'll offer some quick mentions to those making impactful headlines on the gridiron, especially in the ACC and across North Carolina. So with that thought in mind, we bring you our weekly fun facts and shout-outs, brought to you by our good friends at Jimmy's Bar and King Neptune Restaurant in Wrightsville Beach. Jimmy's has a full bar, nightly drink specials, and live music 365 days a year. And right next door, King Neptune has become one of the best restaurants in the entire greater Wilmington area. You can keep up with Jimmy's on Facebook and learn more about King and Neptune Restaurant at neptuneswb.com. All right, DG, time for you to bring it on. What you got left for us this week in your college football notebook?
All right, here we go. We'll begin this week with a fun fact. The Atlantic Coast Conference was the only league in college football that posted 2 victories against top 10 opponents in week 1. Miami beat number 6 Notre Dame. Florida State beat number 8 Alabama. On top of that, Georgia Tech did go to Colorado and beat Deion Sanders and his Buffaloes in that Friday night national TV matchup. It was not a perfect Labor Day weekend for the ACC by any means. Syracuse got crushed by Tennessee. Clemson lost at home to LSU. Virginia Tech fell to South Carolina in Atlanta. Carolina got annihilated by TCU at home. But those huge wins by the Canes and the Noles in particular on very big stages and also in national TV spotlights, they offered an early indicator that the ACC is A, definitely willing to play a lot of those big games against high-quality non-conference foes, and B, that at least several teams in the top third of the ACC will say are very capable of winning those big games as well. Now for some quick shout-outs across all levels of college football. Shout out to 4th-year Miami coach Mario Cristobal and his top 10 Hurricanes. UM's 27-24 victory over number 6 Notre Dame, to me, was bigger and better than any of that school's victories from its 10-3 season a year ago, when star quarterback Cam Ward, now in the NFL, often had to rescue the Canes with offensive fireworks, even against lesser opponents, when Miami's defense was regularly having trouble stopping people or sometimes even slowing them down. The win over the Irish on Sunday night was, I thought, far from perfect, but it was a much more of a well-balanced team effort. The quarterback, Carson Beck, the Georgia transfer, looked pretty good against a well-coached Irish defense. The Miami defense held Notre Dame's running back, Jeremiah Love, one of the best at that position in the entire country, to only 33 yards on 10 carries. There's no way UM would have been able to pull that off last year. And when the Canes needed stops toward the end of that game against Notre Dame, defensive end Reuben Bain Jr., one of their top NFL prospects, came up with 1 sack. And the other defensive end, Akeem Mesidor, a 6th-year senior, came up with another sack. That's the sort of well-rounded effort that bodes well for the Canes as this season continues to unfold. Shout out to 6th-year Florida State coach Mike Norvell and his Seminoles, who have re-entered the national rankings, and deservedly so, after their 31-17 victory over number 8 Alabama in Tallahassee last Saturday. It's a major test of your program's fiber when you fall all the way from a 13-1 ACC championship campaign to a 2-10 train wreck in back-to-back seasons. And it obviously adds some extra spice when, as last week, it's the top 10 Crimson Tide coming to town for your 2025 opener. Besides being much tougher at the line of scrimmage on both sides of the ball, which is a great starting point, the Seminoles just had people who fit their plan against Alabama. The new offensive coordinator, the guru Gus Malzahn, combined with the dual threat quarterback Tommy Castellanos, who lived up to his bold Nick can't save them offseason declaration toward the Crimson Tide, they made FSU infinitely more difficult to defend than was the case last year with DJU at quarterback. The talented and athletic Alabama defense seemed off balance for most of the game, and that is a credit to both FSU's improved talent level, but also the Seminoles' smarter game plan. There's still a long way to go, but that was a huge step back in the right direction for the Garnet and Gold. Shout out to Dave Doran and NC State. I know, it wasn't always pretty, but the Wolfpack's 24-17 victory over East Carolina last Thursday night both avenged the Pack's ugly Military Bowl loss to the Pirates at the end of last season and extended Dave Doran's record to a stellar 28-1 in non-conference games at Carter Finley Stadium since the 2013 season, which was his first in Raleigh. Doran's only home loss to a non-conference opponent from 2014 through the early part of this season came in 2023 on a strange day when a top 10 Notre Dame team beat the Pack after or in the midst of a 2-hour-long lightning delay. That 12-year home run by Dave Doran at Carter Finley is a pretty impressive testament to Doran's well-earned reputation as a consistent winner and state's all-time winningest football coach. I know the Pack fans want more, and I get it, but those superlatives also deserve to be recognized. Shout out to first-year Appalachian State head coach Dowell Loggins. He took a largely rebuilt Mountaineers team to Bank of America Stadium in Charlotte last Friday night and left absolutely no doubt that his team, one of the superpowers in the Sun Belt Conference until recent years, was much better than the Charlotte 49ers of the American Conference. The final score at the Duke's Mayo Bowl Classic was App State 34, Charlotte 11. The Mountaineers outgained the 49ers by a stunningly wide margin of 586 to 218. And maybe the most exciting detail in the victory was that Loggins, an offensive guru with decades of experience in the National Football League and the Southeastern Conference, showcased multiple playmakers in week one. Just as many offenses across the country and across our state were struggling with their timing and their execution. App State quarterback A.J. Swan The former Vandy starter, who was stuck in the depth chart at LSU last year, completed 31 of 46 passing attempts for 368 yards, 3 touchdown passes, and no interceptions. At running back, Rashad Dubinion, a transfer from Arkansas of the SEC, rushed 22 times for 111 yards and a touchdown. And at wide receiver, Jaden Barnes, a really small but really quick guy who was one of the top receivers in the FCS ranks last year at Austin Peay, had 6 catches for 134 yards and a touchdown. It is only one game again, and it came against a rebuilding opponent in the Charlotte 49ers, but that was an absolutely brilliant debut for Coach Loggins and his 2025 Mountaineers. At the FCS level, a huge shout out to second-year Gardner-Webb head coach Chris Reisert and his Runnin' Bulldogs, who went to number 19 Western Carolina and beat the Catamounts 52-45 last Saturday in Cullowhee. The Bulldogs in this game were behind by 28 points in the third quarter. 35-7 was the score before the Bulldogs put up some pinball machine style numbers down the stretch to claim that victory. A fifth-year senior quarterback named Nate Hampton. He's 6'6", 240 pounds, from Davie County High School here in North Carolina. He spent the last 4 years as the backup quarterback at Liberty University, and he entered this year hoping for his first significant playing time of his entire college career. The guy was not only the star against Western, he was the FCS National Offensive Player of the Week after his Gardner-Webb debut. Hampton threw for 263 yards and 2 touchdowns. He also ran for 132 yards and 4 scores in that comeback victory over the Catamounts. The Bulldogs' 28-point second-half comeback was the largest in program history, and it came on the road against a nationally ranked team that's been pretty good in recent years under the head coach Kerwin Bell. By the way, Gardner-Webb immediately gets another huge challenge here in week 2. The Bulldogs are visiting Georgia Tech of the ACC.
I love sports. But is Sport Clips better than sports? Because Sport Clips is sports, plus a hot steam towel. Sport Clips, it's a game changer.
And finally, a shout out to all 5 Division III programs in our state. Brevard College, Greensboro College, Guilford College, the home of our good friend and partner Mike Waddell, proud product of Guilford football and that outstanding college. Methodist University and also North Carolina Wesleyan University. All of them begin their 2025 seasons this week, including with Greensboro College's 6-mile trip down the road to nearby Guilford on Saturday night. Best wishes to all 5 of those D3 programs here in our backyard as they put their seasons into launch mode. Those are my week 2 fun facts and shout outs, Chris, as I turn it back to you for some final thoughts on this week's show.
DG, thank you. And a huge thank you to the North Carolina Port Council for being the founding partner of the North Carolina Sports Network. A quick reminder that DG and his staff are posting daily articles at our fast-growing website, ncsportsnetwork.com, which also has direct links on the homepage to this YouTube channel, which now ranks in the top 2% in the world with more than 35,000 subscribers. It also has the wide variety of places you can get on-demand audio and podcast of our show, The David Glenn Show, and all of our other offerings, plus updates on year 3 of our Old North State Tailgate and Traveling Sports Circus, which on its opening weekend in 2025 made stops in Raleigh on Thursday night for the ECU-NC State game, at Death Valley in the Palmetto State on Saturday night for LSU Clemson, and in Chapel Hill Monday night for the TCU-UNC matchup. This week, we will see you on Saturday morning in Durham in the hours leading up to Duke's noon game against nationally ranked Illinois at Wallace Wade Stadium. So for David Glenn, I'm Chris Edwards. Thank you so much for joining us for This Week in College Football right here on the North Carolina Sports Network.
This has been Bold North State Football Daily. an exclusive presentation of the North Carolina Sports Network. Make sure you follow us on social media at the NC Sports Net, and check out our website that is wall-to-wall coverage of North Carolina sports at ncsportsnetwork.com. Our foundational partner is the North Carolina Pork Council, raising the bacon, raising the bar. Telling the stories of the bold North State, this is the North Carolina Sports Network.